In Touhy, we're going to talk today about the porn industry in the 1960s, 70s, and this is Red Wimette.
Hi, John. How you doing?
I'm pretty good, old boy. Red was actually there for a lot of what we're going to talk about. So, what the problem, the formula will be Red. We're going to talk here for a second. We're going to show you a video we made with photos of all these players and so forth, so you'll have the same information we do. And at the end of that, Red and I will come back and we'll discuss what we just.
Paul Gonski meet his future business partner Jeff Begun while attending Roosevelt University in the early 60s, where they collaborated on a quarterly humor magazine called Aardvark, an abrasive mix of underground cartooning, interviews, and editorials on popular culture, politics, and college life. The magazine was smart, clever, and progressive, and it was too much for the school's administration, who took away the magazine's official sanction, forced Gonski and Begun to publish off campus. When they graduated, Begun and Gonski became interested in filmmaking. Begun returned to Chicago with plans to make and screen his own work. With the help of Gonski, he threw a benefit at the Old Town Club and Boho Hangout, Poor Richards, to raise funds. Although they had low expectations, it was a sellout crowd. Inspired, they rented space from Second City on Monday nights and screened experimental films as part of a weekly program. They were quickly part of the avant-garde crowd in the Windy City, a part of the hub of underground scene. The local media toasted them and wrote glowing profiles about them. They were a linchpin of Chicago's movie underground, a clique of about a dozen active filmmakers, perhaps 1,000 hardcore followers of their work. In 1967, when Second City decided to move into a larger space up the block, they asked Begun and Gonski if they wanted to build their own theater there. They did. Second City offered to split the investment 3 ways, 1/3 held by Second City, 1/3 by a group of 10 outside investors, and 1/3 by Begun and Gonski. The new venture was a bare-bones auditorium that sat about 200 and christened the Aardvark Cinematheque. To draw in regular crowds, Begun and Gonski also booked bands and performances. One of the groups they booked was Warhol's invention, the Velvet Underground. Otherwise, the Aardvark Cinematheque screened everything from Ingmar Bergman's The Magician, Lenny Bruce's performance film, Chicago documentary Andy Warhol's Exploding Plastic Inevitable, Goddard's Masculine Feminine, Emmett Flynn's 1926 Silent, The Palace of Pleasure, and several programs of underground shorts. When they could no longer cover filmmakers' rental fees, they started their own distribution collective called the Center Cinema Collective. They were quickly learning the ins and outs of the business. They learned that a theater on the West Coast could do very well on a gross of $4,000 per week, while in Chicago, a theater couldn't stay open on $4,000 per week. Expenses were killing the theater group, and the Aardvark faced the same expenses encountered by any other theater: film rentals, projectionists, staff, and general upkeep. But those things were the problem. The problem was the mobbed-up projectionist union. Local 110. Its contract mandated a 51-hour pay week for neighborhood theaters and obliged any house charging more than $1.50 to have 2 men in the booth with salaries ranging from $20,000 to $30,000 per year. In addition to wages, theaters had to contribute an amount equal to 11% of the projectionist's salary to a pension fund. By the spring of 1970, they were nearly $48,000 in the hole and could no longer afford its daily expenses. Under pressure by the theater's outside investors to find a profitable booking policy or shut down, Gonski and Begun rented the theater to a man road showing Matt Simber's Man and Wife, a sexually explicit marriage manual. That film made more money in one weekend than the partnership made in a month in art film. Touhy said that by 1969, 50% of the films we were showing were just skin and gay themes. By 1970, adult films exploded across the country. We landed, he continued, in an industry that was about to mushroom. Finally, they switched to porn and the money fell from the skies like rain. Their expansion was breathtaking. They bought the Festival Theater at 3914 N Sheridan, the Three Penny at 2424 N Lincoln, the Bijou at 1349 N Wells, the Rialto at 336 S State, and the Follies at 450 S State. In addition, they also bought the Eden and Indiana Harbor in East Chicago, and the Hamilton and the Festival 2 in Indianapolis. They opened a distribution company specializing in art house and porn, a production company, a pornographic bookstore called Lady Chatterley's Bookstore, a parking lot, a health food store, and a short-lived tourist attraction called Electric Odyssey in Old Town near the Aardvark. While they were building their porn empire, Gonski and Begun tried to stay loyal to their plans to promote art films. They repeatedly attempted to open art house theaters, opening nearly every theater they acquired with a slate of art house films, only to go bust with a few and then turning the theater into a porn palace. They happened to switch to porn at the dawn of what is called today the golden age of porn, that lasts from about 1969 through 1984. In those 15 years, the one film that changed the American landscape the most, a 1972 mafia-financed film called Deep Throat. The film starred Linda Lovelace, who was born Linda Susan Borman, the daughter of a New York City policeman. Lovelace later wrote that she was coerced and sexually assaulted during the production, and that the film is genuine rape pornography because her then-husband Chuck Traynor beat her until into doing the film. The film was produced by Louis Bucci Pereno, the son of Anthony Pereno, a member of the Colombo crime family. Anthony Pereno was the son of notorious South Brooklyn underworld boss Giuseppe Pereno, who had been a major power in the underworld during the Prohibition era. Anthony Pereno entered the mob through the Prophesy family, running gambling operations along the Brooklyn waterfront. Over the next few decades, his arrest record would come to include for murder. In the 1970s, the Perenos Anthony, his son and his nephews invested big in the pornographic book and film industry, earning fortune in loops which brought them to Deep Throat. It was brought to them by Gerard Damiano, a wannabe filmmaker. The Perenos liked the concept and gave Damiano the money he needed, the entire production cost of about $50,000. A portion of the film was owned by John Franzese, the underboss of the Colombo crime family. The initial investment of under $30,000 returned a gross of then record $3 million in its first 6 months of release and was still ranked among the top 10 highest-grossing films, as ranked by Variety, 48 weeks after its release. Estimates of the film's total revenues over the years run from $600 million or more. In 1982, the Perenos, father, son, and nephews, fell out over the film's profits. Anthony Pereno made an official complaint with the Colombo bosses that his family was cheating him. The boss at the time, Carmine Persico, ordered the execution of Anthony's brother, Joseph, and Joseph's son, Louis. Persico assumed that if the family would cheat one another, they were certainly skimming from the top from the Deep Throat film revenue and thereby cheating the Colombo's family. As it was, the Perenos had cut out director Gerard Damiano from his share of the profits, paying about $25,000 instead of the millions he was entitled to. He felt, said his son later, he was lucky to get away with his life. On the night of January 4, 1982, Joseph Pereno and his son were called in for a meeting to discuss the Deep Throat money. The meeting was to be held at 8 p.m. in a house on the quiet, residential neighborhood of Gravesend. When the father and son arrived, a car full of Colombo shooters sped by them and fired off shotguns. Joseph was seriously wounded in the buttocks and taken to Coney Island Hospital, where he was listed in serious condition but survived. His son and a 52-year-old housewife named Veronica Zura, who was storing laundry in a hallway closet in her home at 431 Lake Street, were both killed. The shotgun pellets went through the bottom part of her white front door and hit her once in the head. Zura was a social worker with the Italian Board of Guardians and had recently left the convent to marry her husband. The murderers included Joseph Russo, John Minerva, Vincent Angelino, Frank Sparacco, and Anthony Chucky Russo. Back in Chicago, Paul Gonski never gave up dreaming about moving to California, becoming a legitimate film producer. In fact, one of his last investments was as an associate producer on the low-budget exploitation film Jackson County Jail that starred Tommy Lee Jones and Robert Carradine. Gonski always reserved one of his theaters for high-quality pictures. By then, federal agents were watching Gonski and his businesses because they suspected, correctly, that he was moving pornographic material across state lines. Federal agent didn't deter the outfit from bombing 3 of Gonski's theaters that were using non-union projectionists. On Tuesday, September 21, 1976, Gonski, who was carrying a revolver and thousands of dollars, was getting out of his Mercedes in a parking lot just up the street from the Bijou when someone, more than probably Frank the German Speils, a mafia killer, who owned the parking lot, put 7 bullets into Gonski at close range. He was hit 4 times in the temple, once in the chin, once in the chest, and once in the right shoulder. A gun with a homemade silencer was probably used, because no one reported bearing the shots. The police speculated that Gonski was killed because someone wanted what he had, and paid to have him killed, or it was a message killing to other porn theater operators who were using non-union projectionists. For a while police worked on the logical assumption that Gonski may also have been murdered because the outfit wanted control of the porn business in Chicago and the surrounding states. Mob murderer Marshall Cafano was hauled in for question in the killing because he had been trying to organize porn theater operators on the near North Side. Cafano, who held considerable interests in the pornography business, both in Chicago and California. Cafano's leading porn store was Peeping Tom's on the near North Side. In one case, it was believed that Cafano's porn store shakedown operation brought him $500 a week from the Over 21 bookstore. In the early 1980s, Cafano had financed a guy named Anthony Giuliano in the porn business. Giuliano worked as a collector in the porn extortion business for boss Joe DeVarco, who was commissioned to collect by Cafano. Giuliano answered Mike Glitta directly. Glitta and Giuliano owned several porn stores together. Cafano also owned adult bookstores in Chicago and by 1977 was extorting porn distributor Ruben Sterman out of $500 a week on the basic mob principle of pay or I'll kill you. The actual killer, Frank Speils, who owned the parking lot where Gonski's was killed, was brought in. Steve Touhy, one of Gonski's 2 partners, was totally uncooperative with the police, which did nothing but piques the cops' interest in him. He had a solid alibi. When Gonski was being killed, Touhy was at the Chicago Sun-Times, looking up back issues in the newspaper's public service department. However, that aside, police found out that Gonski and one of his 2 partners, Steve Touhy, had an explosive argument just before Gonski was killed, which resulted in a lawsuit wherein Gonski claimed that Touhy had stolen money from the partnership. The third partner, Jeffrey Begun, saw the writing on the wall and owed his family to California. Touhy put the partnership into receivership and took over the Chicago operation by default. Eventually, when the smoke cleared, police suspect that Steve hired mob enforcer Frank Speils to murder Gonski in 1976 and Patrick Ricciardi in 1985. The police didn't give up their interests in Touhy. It paid off. They found a witness, a man named Terry Ransbottom, who said that Touhy had said to him, "I didn't kill my partner, but my bullets did." It was good, but not solid enough to build a case against Touhy. Police later learned that Ransbottom said he'd been offered $5,000 to deny that Touhy had said that. Steve Touhy grew up in Brooklyn and came to Chicago at 18 after being rejected as unfit for military service in the Vietnam War. He landed a job as the maintenance man in a North Side movie theater that specialized in porn flicks. He was smart and liked to work and became the theater's projectionist and eventually grew close to Paul Gonski and Jeffrey Begun, who were then operated Festival Theaters, which ran the Bijou at 1349, North Wells and other places well. By 1970 he was a partner in the business. And then Gonski was murdered. About 3 weeks after Paul Gonski was murdered, someone bombed the Morton Grove home of porn operator Paul Goodman. Goodman was a porn film and magazine distributor who had been a partner of the Paul Gonski. The summer before, when the pressure on porn operators began, Goodman's warehouse, stockpiled with X-rated films, was firebombed. The bomb damaged the side of Goodman's house. The Morton Grove police chief interviewed Goodman's wife for 5 hours and came away saying, "I just don't know, something is fishy, and I can't make any sense of what she says. She talks about mob people, but she doesn't name any other names than you read in the papers." Goodman's house had also been bombed before. Prior to the October 1977 bomb, someone had tossed another bomb, a dud that landed just outside a bedroom window. After that, a Molotov cocktail was thrown against the house, but also didn't go off, followed by a fourth bomb the year before that caused a fire. Sturman, the self-proclaimed godfather of porn, was born in 1924 and was raised on Cleveland's East Side, where the family ran a grocery and owned several apartment buildings. He served in the Army Air Corps during World War II and attended Western Reserve University. In the 1950s, he started selling comic books out of the back of his car. By the end of the decade, he had built a wholesale magazine company with warehouses in 8 cities. The company sold mainline publications, but Sturman noticed that the hat full of porn publications he sold produced 20 times the revenue of comic books. Within a year, he changed the stock he carried to almost exclusively porn and opened a few porn book retail stores. By the end of the 1960s, Sturman ranked at the top of adult magazine distributors. By the end of the 1970s, he owned over 200 adult bookstores. Larry Flynt, the porn publisher, estimated Rubin's net worth at $200 to $300 million. When the law closed in on his, not because he had done anything criminal but because they disapproved of what he did, Sturman fought them, setting the precedent that if an agency tangled with Sturman, that he had the money and resources to fight back. In 1964, when FBI agents raided his Cleveland warehouse and seized 590 copies of a paperback called Sex Life of a Cop, indicting him on federal obscenity charges, he sued FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. It was the first of 4 federal indictments, and all of them failed to get a conviction, serving no other purpose but to add to Sturman's enormous ego and his legendary status in the porn world as untouchable. Starting in 1969, Sturman made regular flights into Denmark to buy hardcore films that included kiddie porn, bondage, and animals. Sturman spent millions and millions of dollars on Danish porn. In 1971, Sturman and Danish pornographer Lasse Braun produced high-quality peep-show machines that Sturman distributed to states that would allow them. He placed the booths in all his stores and worked a deal with other store owners to supply the machines for free in return for half of the receipts. He then started a company to manufacture booths and another company to service them. From 1970 through their decline in the late 1990s, peep shows produced more than $2 billion in gross receipts, more than 4 times than adult theaters made, and, because they were coin-operated, it was all cash. With the success of peep shows, he moved on to manufacturing plastic sex devices at factories in Asia, and he created sub-companies across Europe. Early on, he recognized that the future in porn was in videotape because they allowed people to watch porn in the privacy of their homes, an enormous factor in the massive wave of video production. Sturman started placing his porn films in tape and opened retail video stores with his production companies, distributing the videos almost worldwide to 60 countries and the 50 states, as well as to his 800 adult bookstores. Sturman was flooded with cash, so much cash, all of it untaxed, that he stored it in briefcases in his Cleveland warehouse. To make sure the money stayed untaxed, he managed to get a Dutch passport in the name of Paul Becker and used that to open several Swiss bank accounts. The IRS was watching Sturman. They opened a low-key money laundering case that outlined Sturman's cash transfers from Cleveland to Switzerland to the Cayman Islands and back to Cleveland. The government also learned that most of Sturman's corporate structure was a mirage. Corporate officers didn't exist or were long-dead relatives of Sturman's or Standard Front men. Later, Sturman's longtime secretaries testified that she had chosen the names of corporate officers from telephone books and novels like Lost Horizons. The IRS tracked down Sturman's Swiss bank accounts, and in an unprecedented move, the Swiss government gave the IRS access to those accounts. In turn, the Justice Department gave secret documents to the Swiss, showing that Sturman worked with organized crime. Rubin began funneling his money to Swiss bank accounts through sham corporations. The Swiss police arrested Sturman, who literally indicted himself by telling the Swiss he only wanted to hide money in Switzerland to avoid paying U.S. taxes. The Swiss tossed him in prison for a month, took his fake passport, and tossed him out of the country. When he returned to the U.S. in 1985, he was indicted for tax fraud. Sturman delayed his tax trial until 1989 by challenging the legality of the Justice Department's actions, demanding to see the secret documents given to the Swiss and denying any connection with the mafia. So Sturman sent his son, David, and a lawyer to another Swiss bank to close down an account. To avoid creating bank transfer records, they took the money in the form of 22 gold bars and $400,000 cash. David Sturman married one of his father's ex-girlfriends and developed a drug problem. His father addressed the problem by firing him. They didn't speak for years. David eventually met the right woman who changed his life. He got clean, got married, and had 3 children. Sturman handed his son the comic book business. Sturman's venture into Danish kiddie porn developed into a sort of fetish for him. Working with Gambino Mafia capo Robert DiBernardo, Rubin produced millions through the production and sale of child pornography, including the magazine Lolly Tots. Sturman's Parliament News churned out loops featuring sex with children. In 1984, Rubin threw a ridiculously expensive Christmas party for his employees at Swingo's restaurant in Cleveland's Statler Hotel. After a pep talk to his employees about the bright future of porn and how they weren't porn pushers but soldiers in the war on censorship, there was a showing of 15-minute mock porn flick starring Rubin Sturman. In the final skit, Sturman appears as a dirty old man approaching a group of schoolgirls playing Ring Around the Rosie. Sturman was a savvy businessman, but in the porn business in those days, muscle went further than smarts. For impact, Sturman used the mafia and together the mob, in the form of Robert DiBernardo, a power in the New York-based Gambino family. Sturman and DiBernardo's methods were crude but effective, strong-arm shakedowns of other dealers, distributors, and suppliers throughout the United States, particularly on the West Coast. They also moved in on independent porn shops who couldn't make their payments to Sturman distribution companies. Oftentimes the reason they couldn't make the payment was because Sturman used a strategy to get the dealers in over their heads with advances and then take over their stores with the threat of cutting them off their supply. DiBernardo, by way of Sturman, controlled vast amounts of the porn business in the U.S. for decades. Interestingly, DiBernardo, target of a federal investigation into child pornography, had no reputation for violence, but status as a made member of the Gambinos made him lethal in the eyes of his victims. At first, DiBernardo had been with the DeCavalcante family in New Jersey. In the late 1960s, he bought Star Distributors, which sold and distributed soft porn. He transformed it to all hardcore porn and sold mostly to outlets around Times Square before its transformation into a family-friendly place. Star, eventually run by DiBernardo, Theodore Teddy Rothstein, and Andrew Andre Dapis, became the biggest porn dealer on the East Coast. All 3 answered the DeCavalcante crime in New Jersey. Within 2 years, Star was a multi-million-dollar conglomerate which controlled bookstores, movie theaters, and publishing houses in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Ohio, and Georgia. The company's biggest client was Rubin Sturman. Pornographer and Gambino capo Ettore Zappi helped to make DiBernardo into the Gambino crime family because of the remarkable amount of money he was producing. DiBernardo went about the business of intimidating his competitors out of business or into joining his network. He invented actually, a secondary business of pirating porn films made by independents. The exact relationship between Sturman and DiBernardo has never been clear. However, DiBernardo was once caught on a recording saying that the Gambinos actually ran Sturman's business, but that may have been nothing more than wise guy bravado. DiBernardo was the target of a wide-ranging undercover FBI investigation of all major publishers and distributors of adult films and magazines throughout the United States called MyPorn. The acronym combined the location of FBI Front Operations Miami with the subject of the investigation pornography. DiBernardo, his business Theodore Teddy Rothstein, and 44 others were indicted in the early 1980s and ended with Bernardo and Rothstein were convicted in Miami of conspiracy, transporting obscene materials for the purpose of sale and distribution, and 3 counts of using a common carrier to transport obscene materials across state lines on June 12, 1981, and each sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, the case was tossed out of court on grounds that FBI agent Patrick Livingston, who went undercover for the operation, lied to a grand jury. Then it was learned that Livingston was experiencing psychiatric problems involving an inability to distinguish between his real and undercover identities. In September of 1977, Livingston and FBI agent Bruce Olafsky moved to Miami, set up a warehouse, and posed as porno film buyers for a company they set up called Gold Coast Specialties. They stayed undercover for 30 weeks, infiltrated the porn industry, and dealt with top crime figures introduced to them by LA pornographer Ruben Gottesman. With those contacts, the agents learned that the porn bosses pirated mainstream movies as well as producing and distributing their own films. They were able to document the fact that DiBernardo helped Sturman gain control of the porno trade on the West Coast by intimidating independent dealers and suppliers through threats and deeds of violence. Sturman took over the operations of Milton Luros in 1974, which meant by the mid-1980s Sturman owned 580 of the 765 city's adult video arcade machines. When Paul Castellano was running the Gambino family, DiBernardo paid his tribute directly to Castellano instead of a capo. DiBernardo complained bitterly and often that Castellano treated him poorly because he despised the porn business and considered DiBernardo to be on the same level as a pimp. It wasn't surprising then that DiBernardo threw his full support behind John Gotti's overthrow of Castellano. It was Gotti who promoted DiBernardo to captain, despite not heading a crew of his own. Just before Castellano was killed, DiBernardo hit international news when it was learned that he rented office space to real estate developer John Zaccaro, the husband of vice presidential candidate Geraldine Ferraro. There was a lot of smoke in the issue but no fire, but it became more and more an issue in the 1984 U.S. presidential election. DiBernardo made the mistake of mentioning to a hood named Angelo Ruggiero that he thought John Gotti was too dumb to be the boss of the massive Gambino family. It was a stupid thing to do. Ruggiero was one of Gotti's best friends. Ruggiero told Gotti, and Gotti told Sammy Gravano to kill DiBernardo. On June 5, 1986, DiBernardo was lured to the basement offices of Gravano's drywall company on Stillwell Avenue in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. With Gravano was Joseph Peruta. When DiBernardo arrived, Gravano told Peruta to fetch DiBernardo a cup of coffee. Peruta left the room, came with a .380 with a silencer, and shot DiBernardo through the head. To this day, his body has never been found. Afterwards, took control of Teamsters Local 282, DiBernardo racket, which dovetailed with Gravano's construction racket. It didn't matter to Sturman. He was also an associate of Ettore Zappi's Carlo Gambino's lieutenant and was seen regularly with Carmine Persico, the head of the Colombo crime family. Sturman rarely went anywhere without his bodyguard James Long, called Diz because he was a dedicated fan of Dizzy Gillespie. Long was an interesting character. He was born in Meadowbrook, West Virginia. In 1925, he was separated from his parents by the age of 2 and grew up in his grandmother's family in Detroit. He was sent to various special schools for troubled youth, spent some time in foster care, and eventually enlisted in 3 different branches of the service before landing permanently in the Air Force and becoming a paratrooper in the famous all-black 555th Division of the 82nd Airborne, the Triple Nickels. He boxed and was a sprint champ in the Air Force and a football player good enough to be scouted by the Detroit Lions and the then Chicago Football Cardinals. He drifted into the underworld by working as a numbers runner and found work as a bodyguard to novelist Harold Robbins, Mayor Carl Stokes, and Frank Sinatra. Later, during Cleveland's mob wars, he drove for mobster Shander Burns and was friends with Burns' sworn enemy Irish Danny Green, who was eventually blown apart in a mafia car bombing. Long himself got caught up in the deadly Cleveland wars and was ambushed and nearly killed in 1976. In 1990, he went to work for Sturman. When Sturman went to jail, Sturman's lawyer, Sanford I. Atkin, offered the judge in the case a $500,000 bribe to be paid through Diz Long. In between all that, he knew Lana Turner, Pablo Picasso, Nancy Wilson and Dinah Washington, Jim Brown and John Wooten. Under pressure from the IRS and the Justice Department, with seemingly one indictment after another, Sturman began selling off his empire, mainly by verbal contracts which brought in Paula Lawrence at the height of her career. Paula A. Lawrence distributed up to 80% of the porn around Chicago and the Midwest. She came into the business as a stock clerk working for Reuben Sterman, the largest distributor of porn in Chicago, in the early 1970s at Castle News Agency in Milwaukee. Lawrence moved to Chicago in 1980. Sterman sold, by verbal agreement, Lawrence and her husband, Roy May, several of his sex shops. From there she was able to buy Capitol News and other businesses from Hollywood pornographer Donald Gittleson. It was a smart buy. By that time, the early to mid-1980s, the porn business across the United States grossed more than $4 billion. That sudden influx of cash from Lawrence and her husband brought Reuben Sterman back around. The original deal was that Paula Lawrence and her husband bought the business from Sterman for $35,000 a month and 2% of the gross sales. The Sterman went to prison for a while and Lawrence and her husband paid the IRS the money they should have been paying Sterman. When Sterman got out of jail, he started shaking the couple down. From 1979 to 1991, they paid Sterman a total of $1,374,270. It was a drop in the bucket because in 1990, the FBI estimated that Sterman was grossing $1 million a day from international porn sales. They weren't Sterman's only victims. Sterman hired bikers from California to smash 8 porn shops in Chicago and 4 in Milwaukee as payment overdue warnings. That didn't always go exactly as planned. The bikers took the plastic explosives on board commercial flights to Chicago, using 2 different rented cars to get around the city. A stray, electronic signals from a traffic light accidentally ignited a bomb in one car, killing one and severely injuring another who became a government witness. Sterman. In another instance, when the owner of Phoenix's sex shop died in 1990, his widow took over. She noticed that $1,000 monthly payments had been to Reuben Sterman, but she could find no bill or contract to justify them. So she stopped paying. Reuben called her to explain the arrangement, but she ignored him. Around Thanksgiving, 1991, Sterman arranged for thugs to smash the store's video machines. The payments resumed. 2 years after Gonski's murder, in 1978, Steve Touhy switched from heterosexual to gay films and hit a gold mine as a result. In 1981, he leased a theater in San Francisco and called it Savages. He converted the basement into a gay orgy room, outfitted with bondage devices, private plywood cubicles, and a sales counter of sexual paraphernalia. He dreamed about expanding his gay porn business nationwide. That's when he went into the mail order business, specializing in gay porn and sadism and masochism videos. Touhy's mail order catalog offered a selection of 1,100 films and made him a second fortune. Life was good for the Midwest's porn king. At a minimum, he was earning at least $75,000 a month, had a luxury condo on Lake Shore Drive, and started collecting Rolls-Royces as a hobby. Then, on Wednesday, July 24, 1985, Touhy's primary rival in the Chicago porn business, 59-year-old Patsy Ricciardi, an outfit-related loan shark who operated the Admiral Porn Theater, was reported missing. His disappearance coincided with the end of a 2-day hearing in the city by the Federal Commission on Pornography. The police found Ricciardi's body corpse the following week, dead and stuffed into the trunk of his car that was abandoned at 1651 West Webster. Patsy Ricciardi, a cousin of mob boss Felix Alderiggio, was a legend in the porn business when he was killed. It was Ricciardi, a pal of Frank Schweiz and Anthony Spilatro, who came up with the concept of hiding and laundering illicit mob monies by converting run-down theaters across the Midwest into porn palaces. Once, when asked by a reporter about organized crime, Ricciardi said, "Organized crime is a media concept. I don't think the two, organized crime and adult businesses, mix. It's like oil and water." Ricciardi was a hyper-aggressive thug even when he didn't have to be. As an example, on the night he officially opened an X-rated theater a few blocks from one of the theaters operated by Gonski, he or his pals tossed a bomb. That time Pimp was a pioneer in porn cassette tapes, watched over outfit-related porn operations from the near north side of Chicago up to the Wisconsin state line. For several months, Mike Glitta struggled for control with mob assassin Frankie Schweiz. It proved too much. He started carrying a pistol, which cost him an arrest. In 1988, Glitta, who joined up with the outfit in the late 1950s, died of a heart attack. Marco Glitta was nailed on federal charges in 1987 when he was arrested for buying remote control bombs that he intended to use blow up another competitor, Paula Lawrence. That cost him 8 years in prison. As it was, Glitta had more than probably burned down 2 of Paul Lawrence's properties in 1986. Sturman was doing time in a low-level security jail in California. To avoid being tried in the biker car bomb case in Chicago, on December 7, 1992, he had a helicopter service fly him out of the prison. The feds assumed that with all of his money and underworld contacts that he had fled the country. He didn't. He was arrested 8 weeks later in an apartment near Disneyland. He was indicted in the biker bombing case and also charged with the destruction of porn bookstores in Cleveland, Chicago, and Phoenix. The jury acquitted him of the bombings and convicted him of extortion through the use of violence. In 1989, Sturman's longtime accountant Chuck Higgins told the FBI that Sturman still worked with the Gambinos. He told the same thing to a federal grand jury. Higgins said that right afterward he was called in by Sturman. He was met in the outer office. One of Sturman's bodyguards approached him and mumbled something about hit men from the Gambino crime family. In the meeting with Sturman waved Higgins' supposedly secret testimony in his face and forced him to sign a document, a confession, to stealing from Sturman, and then he fired him. It was a rare stupid move on Sturman's part. Understandably scared, Higgins went back to the FBI and told them about hundreds of corporate documents that had not been shredded, all of them stored in the basement of Sturman's housekeeper. While all of that was going on, Sturman's friend Ralph Levine began cooperating with the government. Naomi Delgado made a play at bribing a jury with sex and money in exchange for finding Sturman innocent. It backfired. The juror reported the attempted bribery to the judge. Delgado was later sentenced to 2 years in jail. Delgado cooperated with government in exchange for a reduced sentence, and she testified against Rubin. Sturman's son David cooperated with the government as well and in exchange received a 3-year sentence. In 1993, at age 69, Sturman was sentenced to 10 years in prison on an income tax charge. The porn world turned their back on him. Sturman told a reporter 75% of the people in the business started with me. They won't take my phone calls. They won't send a letter, "How you doing? Hope you're all right. I've only got my wife and child." It's amazing how everybody turned. Everybody. Unbelievable. I want to get out of here for only one reason, because I want to spit in the face of so many people, just spit in their face. All I want to do is tell each one what I think of them. Just one time, and then I'll say to them something like, "I hope you rot in hell," and leave. When Sturman walked into prison, he owed the government $29 million in back taxes, so the IRS seized every one of his assets. He died in prison, in 1977, of a heart attack. General Video of America, headquartered in Cleveland, went on, run by Melvin Kaminsky aka Mel Kemmons, an ex-con who served time on tax charges. Rubin's retail store empire was taken over by another convicted tax cheat, Eddie J. Vadelstedt. As for Lawrence, she was indicted in 1985 for conspiracy to conceal millions of dollars. The government had her cold. She pled guilty. Back in Chicago, the FBI had opened its own case on the murder of Patsy Ricciardi and joined forces with the Chicago PD to look at Touhy a little bit closer, but he was operating legitimately, or so it seemed. Touhy's cash expenditures seemed to exceed his income, which was very considerable. Much of what he owned, almost all of it paid in cash, was kept in the name of his friends and family. U.S. postal inspectors were flooded with complaints from citizens across the Midwest over the unsolicited erotic mail advertisements from Touhy's mail order companies. Postal inspectors in several cities answered the ads, and after they received pornographic tapes, warrants were issued to search Touhy's company's P.O. boxes and found original reels of the films. At about the same time, a federal grand in Chicago indicted Touhy in filing false income tax returns. Touhy went on trial in October 1988 for income years in prison for extorting money from porn store owner William Red Ouimet. Ouimet paid a street tax to the outfit through Speils. In 1971, Ouimet contacted the FBI and agreed to become contract agent for the government and to have his store bugged and wired for cameras. Speils would often drop by the Ouimet shop to talk and tell stories about what he had done for the outfit and what he planned to do in the future. His words sank him.
Ouimet, we hope you enjoyed that. Red, let's first explain. You had been a bartender most of your life and a series of other things like most of us. You drifted into this thing. Porn was big money. I think you told me one time you're making $35,000 a month at a porn store you had, or
More than that.
yeah. So it was big. America needs, if you're a young person, you understand. Porn on the streets was new. It just wasn't like it is today. It's everywhere today.
It was sneaky. It was sneaky.
It was illegal too in a lot of places.
It was.
Yeah, Linda Lovelace. I think the whole cast of the movie Deep Throat. They were all arrested.
Even before that, they had the FBI had an operation called My Porn in 1960.
Oh yeah, right. So it was new. People were rushing in to buy these books, movies, whatever.
Magazines were big.
Magazines. I think really the raciest thing around in the early 60s was Playboy, and that was just topless.
Playboy and Penthouse.
Was Penthouse, but that came in later, didn't it, in the 70s?
No, not the same area that Hefner got into it. Penthouse and Playboy, only he went a little bit more risque and put out the centerfolds.
So you've got this store, and basically Frank Schweitz, who was called the German, he was a Chicago mob punk. He was shaking you down.
Later on, my original arrangements were with Marshall Cafano. Originally, it was with Joey Lombardi.
That's right. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And then it went to
Marshall
Cafano. Then it went to Johnny Rogers, who was his prison cellmate in prison. Yeah. And later on, it was when Joey went to prison, it went to Louis the Mooch, and he sent his collector around.
We have to use his last name, and I forgot.
Louis Eberly.
Yeah.
Louis Eberly. His father was Tommy
His father
Ryan.
was the mob guy in New York.
Yes, Tommy Ryan.
The father was killed, I think, wasn't he?
He was murdered. Yes, he was.
My understanding of the story behind that is when they murdered him, Arcota sent over a bunch of guys and forced the son, who was in Chicago for, I don't know how that came to be, and wouldn't let him leave the house because he was going to fly.
They put him on house arrest. I remember that.
Try to kill the guys who killed his father.
He wanted to avenge his father.
But apparently his father, in the eyes of the underworld now, the murder of his father was a legitimate thing.
It was sanctioned by
sanctioned, yeah. So he had to come and there was nothing he could do about it. We're using a new Zoom thing. We're trying to figure out how this works. So let me first ask you, in the story we cover Paul Gonski. He seemed like a pretty normal guy, regular guy. I mean, good kid. He was a film buff like me. And he really tried to circumvent going into porn, but I guess he was losing money, his own money.
Drastically.
Yeah.
The rents were killing him.
And he had done theater, and there's no money, believe me, in theater. Believe me. Did you know, by the way, I'm going to brag, I won the Chicago Irish Play Fest in 2008.
No, I didn't.
I beat out 70 other guys. Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't see the play. It was I didn't see it on stage. So that's too bad. But so he goes into porn with his partners, and we're going to give this briefly because people have already seen this, so we'll go over it briefly.
Do you want me to give you the rundown?
Yeah, why don't you?
He was with Jeff Bagan. They were both partners, and they were losing money left and right. They owned the Three Penny Cinema. They owned several different theaters that were big theaters. And down the street from me, there was a little theater called the Second City, and they bought it.
And now that's the famous Second City.
Right. They moved down the street, and they now have a comedy club there. But at the time, they bought it, and they had a projectionist that came from New York. His name was Steve Tushin.
Tushin, yeah.
And Steve.
I didn't know he was a New Yorker. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, Brooklyn. But he had been written 4F from the draft, and he was riding his bicycle throughout the United States. Stopped in Chicago, and they made him a projectionist.
Oh yeah.
He was so good that they made him a partner because he came up with the idea of gay porn, and it sold. It sold drastically because it was an underground business. And
was Gonski a gay guy? It doesn't matter.
No, family man, good family man.
How about Tushin?
Tushin was married, but and he had children, or Noah. He had his son. I know about Noah, and I knew his wife quite well. But she said to me that
Need to be careful. He's
bisexual.
still. Yeah.
She said he was bisexual. His wife did. So there was a lot of rumors going around, but nobody ever cared. I didn't care. I could care less what was going on the street. I had my nose in my own.
Tushin, we need to just move it. Tushin decides, this is my theory, that, well, you tell him what happened to Gonski.
I'll tell you exactly what happened. Tushin, they were getting leaned on by the mob, and Tushin knew it, and so he figured, I'm just going to go ahead and throw my hat in the ring. And he told Schweiss that he would go with the mob, but his partners wouldn't. And that's when Frank Schweiss murdered not Jeff Bacon, Paul Gonski.
I didn't put it in the story, but the parking lot where he was murdered belonged to Schweiss, where Gonski.
Also, Schweiss lived in the building right next door to it.
He lived next door.
Big bars on the door. He told me the story how he did it. He told me, he said, when that guy had the accident out by my shack.
Yeah.
Shack was actually a valet, where a valet would take your keys and everything.
Yeah.
And so, but he had euphemisms for everything. The accident, the guy by my shack. And he said, then I went in the house, dismantled the pistol, put it in a something to melt it, where it had propane or whatever coming underneath it. He melted the pistol, and it was a high standard 22. And he said, then I got in a hot tub, and he said, I just laid back there and relaxed, and nobody was looking for him. Nobody even questioned him at that time. They didn't know why the murder took place. They didn't understand it. Later on,
they didn't. They thought it was a robbery initially, according to
and Paul had a 38 caliber pistol on him. Never got a chance to fire it.
He also had a great deal of cash on him, but
yes, he did.
Wasn't taken. So this is the mob moving in now. So they get rid of Gonski. They set a bomb off in someone's house out in the suburbs. I know that. And then the other guys just said, the hell with this. His partners went to California.
There was only one other partner. There were three guys.
Smart thing to do. Yeah.
The other one was Jeff Bacon. He went out to San Francisco and opened up Savage Films out in San Francisco.
It was that porn?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, what was the name of it?
Out there.
What was the name of it?
Savage.
I don't know. Is it known for any one thing? Or?
Yeah, it turned gay. He found out there was more money in the gays than there was. That's why he went to San Francisco. He found out
Why is that? I'm just curious. Why is that? Because I remember there was an explosion of porn, but I wasn't aware there was a bigger explosion from what I've been reading in gay porn.
Gay porn was a prelude to straight porn.
Yeah.
It was more underground. And when they saw how much money they could make in it, they said, oh, well, we have to have Debbie Does Dallas, Linda Lovelace, Behind the Green Door. All those, they were in New York. Those were made in New York.
Yeah. Those films made hundreds, it's hard to understand that, but hundreds of millions of dollars.
Actually, about 12 billion.
Billion, yeah. Linda Lovelace, who got nothing, died basically broke. But the film, they think, is in the billion area. They don't know. no
Well, it's still a classic.
accounting for these things.
I don't know how many of them I sold. I used to buy them 100 deep. You know, if you were getting a title,
Yeah.
I would call up and I would say, give me 100 deep on that one.
So
Because
let me,
very well.
let's go along to this fascinating guy. His name escapes me. He's a big porn producer. What's his name?
That would be Reuben Sturman.
Reuben Sturman. I mean, this guy
He
just
was the king of
personifies.
porn.
Yeah. To me, he just sort of personifies no conscience,
None.
money hungry.
No ethics at all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How was he able to operate so long without the mafia? Just now, he had a mafia partner who was there as a muscle. But
In
how
New
is it
York.
they just?
He had a partner in New York. He was from
Yeah.
Cleveland. He had a partner in New York. And the only reason I know that for sure is we had a store right next to me. It was owned by Capital News, which was Chicago. That was his. And when he was in prison, Paula Lawrence was his mistress in
Oh, is that what it was?
yeah. She was his mistress in Cleveland, and she went to Milwaukee and became the director of Castle News. Well, Castle
Which
News,
he owned.
he owned all the news companies he owned.
Yeah,
He owned everything that had news on the end of it. He owned
yeah,
it. You could, and they were all cookie cutter stores. They were identical. They were laid out the same. They had
Yeah.
a raised platform. They had the same colors. Everything was, you could walk in and say, this is one of their stores.
yeah.
So what happened was she came in and took the bigger fish, which was Capital News in Chicago, and she put everything in her name because he was indicted for income tax evasion. She put everything in her name, the property, the business, the corporation, everything.
I see. So that was what led to this massive lawsuit that never ended. And so she just kept it. She just, well, it's my name. Screw you. You're in jail. And
Yeah,
his son I didn't understand that part. I thought it was. I wasn't sure, so I didn't write it. I understand now. So that's
his
what
son,
she
David Sturman, got involved and said, wait a second, you owe us.
Now, let me explain. David Sturman is Sturman's son.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she didn't want to pay him. But she said, hey, I went through all the FBI arrested me. I went through all this baloney and I had to pay back taxes and I had to do this and I had to do that. And she said, I'm not giving it up. Why should I give it up?
So what was the end result of that? Do you know?
The end result is she did not give it up. She married Roy May, and a friend of mine who was a Chicago police officer at the time, his name was Jed Stone. He retired from the police department and became their security.
Yeah.
And he called me when they got bombed. And he said, who do you think did it? And there were bikers from out in Arizona that did it.
I didn't know she was bombed.
Oh, yeah. She got bombed by Marco Galita, Mike Galita's brother. Mike Galita really had a corner on the porn back in the 50s before they were there. Yeah. Maybe they were there, but they were small. But he had everything. All the prostitution, all the porn was handled by him off of Rush Street. And his brother, he died in 87.
Yeah. His brother, I think, was killed, or no?
Marco.
Yeah. No. Marco was, he just died of natural.
Yeah, both of them did. But Marco went to an ATF agent. His last name was Baranowitz. And I talked to the ATF agent. And he told me that he was in Milwaukee. And Marco went up to Milwaukee and said, I want you to make a bomb for me. And he made it very complicated, the bomb, the agent. And so he finally told him, he said, can you place the bomb for me? And the agent said, oh, yeah, no problem. We could do that. And so they went to, she lived at Lake Point Towers then. And she had a Mercedes 500 SL, beautiful car. She had a cigarette boat on Lake Michigan. She had everything. I mean, she had millions of dollars. And so the agent went and actually placed the bomb. Other agents were watching, and then they moved in on him and they arrested him.
Yeah.
And there's a newspaper article on that.
Why? Because Sturman, was completely unethical. Why didn't he just kill her or have her killed? He had new people who would do it. You know what I mean?
She had bodyguards. She had bodyguards.
Uh,
And they weren't mob. They were police, retired police.
yeah.
They would leave the police department, detectives would leave the police department and go to work for her because she paid them like 200 grand a year. And the police didn't pay that.
So, as we had in the tape we've just shown our watchers, our audience, Sturman's empire just collapsed, and it collapsed quickly. But a lot of it was internal, people running to different agencies, including his son.
Yeah.
If I understood that correctly, his son went to the FBI, and
He was indicted.
yeah, but I think
was indicted.
he
That was back in the 80s.
he spilled the beans,
Early
I think,
90s, I believe.
on his father, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Let me ask you something, Red, because a lot of people, they use this term, they never bother to explain what it is. When they were shaking you down, right? How does that? They walk in, they say, "I'm Marshall Caifano, I'm a gangster, and I need." Firstly, how do they decide how much money they want? Because they don't know how much you're making. What do they just blatantly come out and say it?
What they did with other people is totally different than what I did. What I did in the very beginning was I was on the south side and I went to Jimmy Couture. And I said, Jimmy, I saw tons of money in the porn business because I filled in at this one place and it belonged to the Over 21. It belonged to Capital News. And I filled in there and there was so much more money than the bars because I was working in B-girl joints at that time, tending bar.
By the way, what the hell is B-girl? It's not a term we have on the East Coast. What is that?
Buy me a drink, sir.
Oh,
And then you get a swizzle stick and you turn it in at the end of the night and they give you X amount of dollars because you sold so many drinks.
really?
Yeah. People that wanted female companionship.
I did a lot of business once with the Koreans, and they had something similar to that.
So the Japanese.
The hostesses, yeah, hostesses. And they'd sit with you no matter how long you were in the bar, you know. Oh, I got it. Anyway.
They drank tea. They drank tea that made it look like liquor. And the people were drinking the liquor up, but it was watered down liquor anyway. You couldn't get drunk.
Yeah. So what happened? So
in my case, Jimmy Couture said, go see Joy. He's a nice boy. He'll take care of you. And that was Joey Lombardo. So I walked in and asked for permission to open. And they said, go ahead. You got the okay. And I opened up. And then they assigned, before I even opened up, they assigned Marshall Caifano. He just got out of prison.
Yeah.
And he needed something.
What year are we talking about?
We're talking about 1972, 1973.
Oh, yeah. So he must have just gotten out of prison.
Before Gonski was murdered.
On that millionaire he was trying to.
Ray Ryan.
Yeah. So he just got out on the Ray Rogers thing. Yeah, interesting.
So,
by the way, did you ever know Joe Pignatello? Probably not.
I did not.
He was in L.A., Las Vegas, rather. So.
No, did not know.
Nice guy, good man, but he was friends with Caifano up until they both died.
Well, the guy who was arrested with Caifano was Johnny Delmonico.
Don't know the name.
I didn't know who he was either till Marshall told me. But he was arrested with him in 1964
for the attempted murder of what was
extortion.
Ray Ryan.
Ray Ryan.
Ray Ryan. I've never heard of Delmonico before or since.
Johnny Delmonico.
Huh.
He was with him. He was the muscle.
So you've got the because Caifano was buried in a child's car, a little dinky thing.
I talked about that and people laughed at me when I told them.
I was shocked when I saw it.
It was only 5 feet.
Yeah. So you're on a schedule to pay these guys. How do they know?
No, we didn't have a schedule then. What happened was the first time I was open, the first week I was open, we did a count. And our deal was no magazines. They belonged to me. But the peep shows in the back room, we split 50-50. And the first count we did, it was $1,000. And Marshall said, you give me $500 a week, every week. I don't care if you make $1, $1 million. I want my envelope for 1,000 or 500. And I said, deal, done. We shook hands. The store made more money. The first week was nothing.
Yeah.
The store made millions, but he never came back. He was a man of honor. He never came back and said to me, well, we're going to up the ante. Now, those guys on Rush Street, they would have.
Yeah.
And they actually leaned on a couple other people that I knew, and they would walk in and say, we're from the neighborhood association, and we want 500 a month or 500 a week.
How many porn stores were there, do you think?
At that time,
In Chicago? No, not.
at that time, there was probably maybe one is big then. There was A&A, probably maybe 30, about 30 of them.
Yeah, not many when you think
No.
about it. Yeah.
Two in the Loop that were down in the
Mhm.
Loop. One had been there since 1952, and that was owned by Leo Weintraub. And he opened up his own distributorship. Also, he was very close to Sturman, but he opened up his own distributorship on Milwaukee Avenue. It was called L&W Sales. It was an old bank, and he bought the building. And he had a vault in there where he kept everything in the vault. So if the police ever came for a raid, he could close the door on the vault.
Yeah. You know, even in New York City, it was Times Square, which didn't look anything like it looks today. Boy, that was a
42nd
sleazy-
Street. 42nd Street was all
that was-
porn.
I mean, we were boys. We get on the train and just walk through Times Square, 42nd, just as tourists, you know, because there were so many porn stores and naked women, and you know, this was
Live
all new.
shows, live shows.
For my
Come on in.
generation,
Parkers
this
out on the
was a-
street.
Yeah, I mean, for us, for all of America, just today, I don't even think people turn and look, but in those days, it was pretty outrageous, you know. And by the way, when Deep Throat played in the town where I was living in New Haven, Connecticut, at the time, people were lined up way down the street.
Around the block.
Yeah,
Around the block.
yeah, and it wasn't guys in raincoats; it was couples, mostly couples,
The curious.
or
The
group
curious.
of guys. You know, big group of guys going in. You know, and it was cold. Imagine. I can't imagine. And the thing is, pornography sort of fell on us, didn't it? Like a big wet blanket. And then
I guess it did.
when could you say it disappeared? 2000? Not disappear. You know what I mean? The
It
saturation.
disappeared when the internet came in.
Yeah.
When the internet came in and you didn't have to buy VHS tapes, you didn't have
That's a
to
good
buy
point.
CDs anymore.
You and I were talking about VHS
Yes,
a
the
minute-
Betamax was the original porn.
because
When
people
they
could
saw-
go home.
They made a deal with Panasonic instead of Sony. And they were kicking out more. It actually set the standard for the whole industry of a videotape.
So what had happened for
Porn
you
did it.
young
Porn
people?
was the
who-
one that really said it.
you people who weren't around for this, Red just explained it to me. So porn was filmed on film, right? And
Yes.
then at some point, well, why don't you explain? I don't really understand.
It originally, when I was around, originally it was like we called them smokers. They were 8mm shorts, 15 minutes
Yeah.
at the most.
Yeah.
And they came in a little black or white box. They came in a little white box. That was it, and
Mhm.
had the name written on it. That was
Yeah.
no pictures, no nothing. And people would buy them up. And eventually, when you film these things, there's a lot of editing because it was all silent. There was no, and then we went to Super 8, which was talkies, and then we went to 16mm, which was
Was Super 8 film?
yes,
Oh,
that was.
I remember those short things. So if you went to a stag party for guys going to get married, that's what they showed. They had a big projector.
And where did they get them? The porn shops.
Yeah. And I remember though, they came in little boxes like that. Yeah. I sound like a pervert, but it wasn't just me. If you had a friend at my age at that time, everybody, you know,
What kid did you see smokers when they were going to college?
yeah. But we were much more innocent people. Do you know
Very
that?
much so.
At that time, there were laws in Connecticut on you couldn't show a woman's breast.
Mm.
Yeah. And the nipples had to have covers on them. And
Actually, Howard Hughes, they had tassels. Tassels.
tassels.
Howard
Yeah.
Hughes had a problem with it when he was doing, I think it was, I can't remember her name, but Jane Russell.
Jane Russell, that's
He
right.
was doing, and they talked about her mammaries, and they
Yeah.
were exposed; they were too big. And he
Yeah.
went against the motion picture the board of governors, and he proved that he could get away. That was way back in 1950 something,
Right.
and
Right.
maybe in the 40s.
Early, I remember that. Yes.
But that set a standard for porn, because then porn said, "Okay, we can go a little step further. We'll just keep it underneath the table."
You know, when that gate was opened, let's put it there. With it was a young actress who was filmed. She was an inventor or something. She was apparently very brilliant in real life, but she had filmed a thing for a European director where she had an orgasm on film. And that, I think, for mainline modern times, that's probably the beginning. And then they open these gates, and the cows are never going to come back.
No.
You know? Yeah.
We had a saying about that. The cows are never going to get back inside. That's it.
No, they're not coming back to the barn
They
because.
went out to pasture.
And as a writer, as you know, I'm a photographer. I paint a little bit.
You're an excellent writer.
Thank
Excellent
you, sir. I'm a writer. It is the lowest common form to translate something. You know, it's very difficult to write without using a four-letter word. It is, because four-letter word's easy. I could save 2-3 paragraphs with a well put "fuck you," but you know, but it's your job as an artist not to do that. As an intelligent person, to work upwards. You know, in porn.
When I read my book, anything that had any profanity in it was a quote from somebody who said something. I never put any four-letter words in.
What porn does is it goes to the lowest common denominator.
Right.
There's nothing artistic. Now, today, I think they're porn. I haven't seen them, but I think they're more.
It was very primitive. It was animalistic.
It really was. It was in black and white. It had some good. You could usually see the track marks on the arms. That's serious. You know, you could see black things on their arms. I think today it's a lot more.
Oh yeah, and in those days they used junkies. Those people didn't get paid. I mean, they paid them practically nothing.
Yeah,
$100.
So anyway, then they went to video, right?
Right. That was in '79.
And that is when the home porn
that was very big, and then it went into DVD.
So that at one point did it go private? We've got about 10 minutes left.
I would think, looking back, I would say about 2000, 2001, 2002.
Yeah, because people could now watch it in the privacy of their home.
Oh, you could download it on your computer.
But prior to that, DVDs meant you could go to a porn store and buy the DVDs and go home.
That was back in 1996.
Yeah, you know what? That's fairly recent. Think about it. And not have to go into a movie theater. The thing was, the theaters that were showing them were old theater. The movie industry, you'll remember this, was in a lot of trouble in the 70s. Do you remember that the bosses went to the White House for a handout? The theaters that were, you know, they were usually in the downtown parts of cities.
And they were owned by the studios. They were owned by Fox. They were owned by RKO. They were owned by these companies. They would buy the property, and all of a sudden they weren't doing any business, so they'd sell them.
And what happened is that because they're in the older part of the city, sometimes it's a little risky to go down there. Also, you know, everybody and his brother saw you standing in line waiting for, you know, Joey Does the Dog.
Oh yeah, did you see Mike?
I know where you were. That yeah. we're running out of time, but we've got 8 minutes left, but we'll talk quickly. It's fun to do these things with you. You're very sharp, and you're old like me, so I don't have to reference.
I'm only
things.
74.
Is that all you are? Oh,
Yeah.
you're a baby. Did we discussed it? I wanted to talk to you about the Kennedys. We talked about that. So, right?
Yes.
Did we? All right. I wanted to discuss that. What happened so we know why porn sort of went underground. It went into the home now. Do you think the mob is still involved with that?
Yes.
Why? I mean, what?
Because they
making it, or-
bought up X videos, everything that was on there. They bought stock in the companies. And so now they sold it all to the Czech Republic. And they made billions of dollars when they sold it.
Sold what?
The only one left is Pornhub.
No, I'm sorry. They sold what to the Czech?
The stock in the company.
Oh, I see. In these porn
Right.
video.
The Czech Republic is communist.
Yeah.
And they put up the money for it and said, we want to have it. And they had billions of dollars and they sold it out. By this time, it went to the children. The stock was inherited of mobsters, the people that bought into it. They were looking ahead to invest in the future.
You know, the guy who was, just to give you an insight into how things were, I'm sorry, what was the porn king's name?
Sturman, Ruben Sturman.
Sturman's mafia guy, whose name was forgotten. Remember him? His bodyguard.
I never really knew. Really knew.
The guy who worked out of New York.
But he was part of the Gambinos.
Yeah. He said that when he went to see Big Paul Castellano to tell him, because he's making so much money. And from what he wrote, he said, he'd turn over hundreds of thousands of dollars.
A million at a time.
In suitcases. And that Castellano treated him like a leper. He'd come to the guy's house. He'd never offer him anything to drink or eat. He said he looked down on me because I was in porn, and he felt Paul Castellano was above that. That he was a bank robber, mafia don by trade. So even in the mob, I think there was that
seediness.
stench.
They're at the low end of the industry.
yeah. And none of them came to any good.
No.
If you think about it, no one who was Gonski's dead, Sturman died in prison.
Yes.
Really, the only way we could tell a tale is the woman you were discussing.
Paula Lawrence?
Yeah, I think she probably got one piece.
He doesn't want to talk about anything to anybody.
But she got away with millions, so she's
probably.
But the rest of them were dead, died in jail, or were haunted by the federal government. I mean, the federal government really came down hard on pornographers. Hard. That sounds like a sexual thing. Came down hard on.
Came down hard on him.
We should make a porn movie about the FBI coming down. So they destroyed destroyed the porn industry from one level, and then of course technology moved it out. Well, they didn't move it out of mainstream; they moved it further into mainstream. It's probably the best way to.
And it became international then.
Yeah. We got 4 minutes left. How are you? You okay down there in the?
I'm great.
Swamplands? You're not afraid of being eaten by an alligator or something?
No. I'm in the Panhandle.
But isn't the Panhandle just like a big jungle or something?
No. We got beautiful beaches here. The Emerald Coast is just.
Is that? I went to some town that was built or founded by Greeks, and they would go underwater and get the sponge. That's on the west coast of Florida.
Somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, it's all Greek restaurants and so forth. It was actually a nice little town. But Florida is a lot bigger than you think it is.
The peninsula is a whole different country than up here.
Yeah.
And years ago, many years ago, what they did was they put it on the ballot to change it and have a North Florida and a South Florida. And it didn't pass. It didn't pass because they wanted to be like North Dakota, South Dakota, that sort of thing.
Well, in three
North
minutes
Carolina,
left,
South
3.5
Carolina.
minutes left, but we had the same thing in Maryland, the eastern shore of Maryland, until they built that massive bridge. You had to go all the way around the state to go down there. And so it was kind of its own country.
Are you talking about the Chesapeake?
Yeah, that region. Yeah, you had to go all the way around to get there. You had to drive. And then Schaefer, or I guess it was the governor, they built a massive bridge so you can now people started flooding in. But up until that time, it was the same situation. It wasn't really a part of Maryland. It was its own little nation, So.
Well, this is a whole different world up here. It really is.
Is it? It's real
very
Florida, I guess, right?
Very conservative. I love it. I love it here.
Well, I live in the People's Republic of Shepherdstown, so I wouldn't know. But the important thing, it's my wife calling, and I'll have to call her back. But the important thing is it's a nuclear-free zone. So should you come to visit me, don't bring any nuclear bombs with you. Keep those in Florida. This is a bizarre place, dude. Our time is almost. I told you, all the men here have ponytails.
No, you didn't tell me that.
Oh yeah. This is where 1969 went to die. Here, and all the men have ponytails. Oh yeah. It's just,
Up here, the rednecks that we have, if they had a ponytail, will somebody come up with a knife and just grab them by the ponytail and slice it off?
Our rednecks are. I shouldn't say that's mean. I shouldn't say that, but they've been pushed out. This is becoming part of Washington, D.C.
Yeah, they went west into the Appalachians.
Yeah. We have about a minute left, but I want to thank you. We should do another one of these sometime. What do you want to do it on?
Anytime, John.
All right.
You name the subject. If I have knowledge of it, I'll be glad to talk to you anytime.
I did this a 1-hour video on the murder of the two guys, the two partners who killed that poor boy in the 1920s.
Leopold Loeb.
Leopold Loeb. And,
yes.
I think like 2 people watched the videos. An hour.
Very interesting story, though.
It's a fascinating story. Yeah. And it's interesting how Leopold and Roger Touhy's lives sort of, they both got out of prison at the same time. They went in at the same time, got out at the same time. We're out of here. I'll talk to you soon, man. Bye-bye.